How's everybody doing out there? So today we're going to be talking about Chapter 1. And so Chapter 1 is just going to give us a big background information on all the definitions and everything that we kind of need to do all the statistics that we're going to be working on this semester. So this section can get a little boring because there's a lot of definitions. So I'm going to try to keep it brief, and I'm going to make it so there's a lot of practice problems for you guys to work on that you're going to be able to share with the rest of the class. All right, so let's dive right in and see what we're talking about. So hopefully when you think about statistics, one of the things that comes to mind is, trying to find data and then ultimately trying to answer questions about that data. So statistics, if you read the newspaper, go online, go anywhere, you'll see that statistics is around everywhere. So this is a great class for people to take just because of how relevant it is to everything that we do in life and stuff. So even if you're not necessarily calculating statistics, having a little bit of an understanding about it is going to help in terms of making you make informed decisions about articles you read and things like that. All right. So again, our two big goals of statistics that we want to look at is we want to be able to organize the data in such a way that makes sense. And so that could be in either tables or graphs or eventually into numbers. And then ultimately what we want to do is be able to answer that question or set it up in some way so that someone that doesn't know anything about the data will be able to understand what we did and understand the answer that we came up with. So in statistics, it's going to be broken up into two different categories. So we're going to be either talking about descriptive statistics or inferential statistics. So descriptive statistics is what we'll spend about the first half of the semester talking about. And so this is the way that we're going to organize and summarize our data. So again, this could involve graphs, it could involve charts, but ultimately we want to be able to move into numeric ways to do these as well. So our inferential statistics is where we're trying to actually answer a question, where we're trying to draw some kind of conclusion based on what we have. And so from this, we're going to be using probability to determine how confident we are that the conclusions that we come up with are true. So again, that's going to have where we spend about the second half of our semester. That's where it gets pretty exciting too, because then we can actually statistically guess that our data is correct and things like that. All right, so these interpretations are going to be the main thing that we're going to try to do in this class. Given our information, can we interpret what it means? Can we describe what it means? So we're going to be using calculators to do a lot of the hard stuff, and then again using that information to try to talk about what's true and what's not true about these things. All right, so let's get into our first definitions here. So I'm going to go through these briefly again because you can read them yourself for the most part. So the most important things that we're going to talk about in statistics are going to be broken into these two categories of populations and samples. So population is going to be the group that we're trying to study, and so it's going to be the big group. So it could be like all the students at FCC. In the little description I had above, it was all the people that were employed in Maryland. And so ultimately, we're trying to make a conclusion about the population, but it's too hard to actually ask every single person in the population a question. So what we do instead is we take a sample. And so what we're trying to do is get a smaller group of people, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, depending on the size, and use that information to actually make a prediction about our population. Now, we do have to be careful with our sample, and we're going to talk about some sampling techniques in a little bit, that we want our sample to be representative. So that means we want it to have a similar makeup to the makeup of the population that we're interested in terms of gender, race, any of those kind of factors and stuff like that. And so we also want to make sure that our sample is what's called random. So because we want to make sure there's no bias in our sample or anything like that. All right, so our parameter pairs up with our population. So notice our P for population goes with our parameter. And so this is the number that describes something about the population. And for the most part, the two main things that we're going to be interested in studying in statistics are going to be the population mean and the population proportion. So you may not know what those words are yet, but eventually we'll get to the point where we do. And so similarly, our statistic goes along with our sample. And so again, these are going to be our sample mean and our sample proportion. So these are going to be the two most important calculations that we're going to make. And this is what we're generally going to try to estimate our population by, are these different things. So again, the statistics is going to be one of the most important parts of what we do, because it's going to be what allows us to make predictions about our population, whether it's a mean or a proportion. All right, so again, when we're talking about describing statistics, that's going to be our descriptive statistics section. And when we're trying to make conclusions, that's going to be where we're doing our inferential statistics in this case. All right, so some more definitions that we've got here. So I told you there's a lot of definitions. So are related to our variables. So these are some things that we're trying to record about our sample. So this is kind of like actual data that we're collecting. So if we were talking about someone's grade in a class, then these would be the grades that we collected. If we were talking about someone's salary, this would be an individual person's salary that we were actually talking about. Now the variables can be broken up into different types of categories. So they can either be numeric or quantitative variables, which obviously means that they're made up of numbers in this case. And then that can be broken up into two subcategories. So they can either be discrete variables or continuous variables. So discrete just means that they have to be whole numbers or counting numbers. So like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So things like, so those would be those types of numbers that we're looking for. So continuous means they could be decimals or things like that. So if you were talking about someone's height, someone could be 6.1 feet tall, someone could be 5.4 feet tall. So the fact that we can have decimals allows those to be continuous in that case. So if something isn't numerical, then that means it's going to be made up of like letters, for example, or some categories. So categorical variables are ones that are going to divide people into categories. So if you think about like grades, for example, we've got A, B, C, D, and F. So each of those could be a categories, and we can describe people's test grades based on those different categories. So for the most part, categories can be numbers, so we just have to be careful that, like an ID number, like someone's social security number would be a category, somebody's phone number would be a category. But we just want to make sure that we recognize the difference between them. So, all right. So that does our variables. So again, just a quick summary here of what we've got. So our population is the group that we're interested in studying. Our sample is the small group that we surveyed of the population that we can actually study. Our parameter describes something related to the population variable, so either population mean or population standard deviation or population proportion. Statistic is a number that describes something about the sample, so again, sample mean, sample standard deviation. Our variable is something that we record about our sample, so someone's individual data score. Quantitative variables are going to be numeric. Qualitative variables are going to be ones that are broken into categories. All right, so with that in mind, let's buzz through these examples real quick, and then I've got some for you guys to practice on as well. So for example 1, a study was conducted at a local college to analyze the average cumulative GPAs of students who graduated last year. Fill in the letter of the phrase that best describes each of the items below. So our cumulative GPA of one student who graduated from the college last year. So in this case, we're dealing with just one individual student. Then in that case, what we're looking at is our variable. So we've got our variable is going to go with letter A. So a group of students who graduated from college last year randomly selected. So the fact that this is talking about randomly selected means we're only talking about a select group of those students. So this is actually going to be our sample in this case. All right, so the average cumulative GPA of students who graduated from the college last year. So in this case, since we're looking at the average, this is related to our variable that we're interested in. And since in this case it's talking about all students who graduated from the college last year, this is going to be our parameter. All students who graduated from the college last year, so in this case we're talking about every single student involved at the college. So this is going to be our population. So this is the group that we're trying to study. And then finally for E, the average cumulative GPA of students in the study who graduated from the college last year. But in this case, since it says in the study, this is referring to the sample group that we surveyed. So this is going to be our statistic. So in this case, we'll get our E for that. All right, perfect. So again, this is just kind of applying the definitions, making sure we recognize what's going on and we understand everything that's there. All right, so let's look at example 2 real quick. So we want to know the average mean amount of money first-year college students spend at FCC on school supplies that do not include books. We randomly surveyed 100 first-year students at the college. 3 of those students spent $150, $200, and $225 respectively. So in this case, just to highlight a few things here, so notice our average amount is going to be our parameter in this case, so either our statistic or our parameter, either one, depending on which one we're talking about. So we randomly surveyed 100 first-year students, so this is going to be related to our sample, and then we've got some actual data scores here, so this is some data that we've acquired. So we didn't show all the data, just a few randomly selected ones. So our population for this is going to be all FCC's first-year college students and how much money they spent. So the amount of money first year FCC students spent. And I'm going to put all in here just to kind of emphasize that this is the whole entire population. So our sample is just going to be those 100 that we surveyed. So the sample is the 100 first year students surveyed. Oops. And so again, our parameter, in this case, it's the average amount of money spent. So average of all students. Oh, I guess let me fix the population. So the population is just all FCC, all first year. It's not the amount of money. That's related to the parameter. So it's just all first year FCC students, period. So no money indication here. Sorry, my bad. All right, so again, our parameter is going to be the average of money spent by all FCC students first year. The statistic is going to be the average amount spent by the 100 surveyed. And then finally, our variable is just going to be the individual amount that each person actually spent. So in this case, we've got a couple, we've got the 150, 200, 225. So it's the amount spent by an individual student. All right. If you have any questions or anything about this, definitely message me and let me know. So I've got a couple practice problems for you guys to work on, and so there's going to be a place in the team site so that you can actually share your answers and stuff like that with everybody. And so we'll come back to the next video in just a little bit. So good job.